So I want to talk about the challenges of running a restaurant in the future. For 2 years now, I've run my own restaurant, and I don't want any more challenges. It's enough. The future of the restaurant, it doesn't involve robots. It doesn't involve freeze-dried food. I think it's quite the opposite. It involves the simple notion of being responsible. If you're responsible, then everything kind of falls into place. But unfortunately, in the future, this responsibility is going to be somewhat forced on us to a certain extent. And I'll get onto that as we go on. So, I want to start, before I go into the dreary part of the future, I want to first and foremost say that if what we produce and what we eat and what we're serving to our guests, unless it tastes delicious, then none of what I'm about to talk about makes sense. And I think that's the challenging part. We can all grow stuff and you can grow mass amounts of stuff, but the challenging part is making it taste delicious. We're not going to cook food that doesn't taste of anything just to be sustainable. It's kind of, I don't know, it doesn't make sense to me. So instead of shaking your head and saying, oh, you can't grow things in the greenhouse that taste delicious, and why not embrace this challenge? And this is something that we've done at Amass. And I mean, I was the biggest skeptical and about making things taste delicious in the greenhouse. But I'm going to get to that later on in the speech. I want to talk about how governments will affect us. We're going to be hit with loads of restrictions as restaurants. Because if you think about a restaurant is something that is based on waste. We take a product, we refine it, the process of refinement produces waste. It doesn't matter if it's a restaurant, if it's mining, if it's any industry. If you refine something, you produce waste. How do we deal with this waste? We're going to be monitored on our waste. We're going to be monitored to the extent of there's going to be a governing body that counts the seats in your restaurant, the amount of guests that you do, and the amount of tax. Let me go back. The amount of waste that you produce will literally depict the amount of tax you pay to the governments. And everything I'm saying right now is completely hypothetical and theoretical, but this is what I really think is going to happen. You literally pay a higher tax if you exceed the quota for waste that you're given. So this is going to force us into looking at an outlet for this waste. And that kind of leads me into the next slide. The Chateaubriand, it doesn't exist anymore. This center cut. In the future, it's going to cost too much for us to use this cut of meat. We're going to have to buy the whole animal. We're going to have to buy the whole fish. We're going to have to serve the whole vegetable, the tops, the bottoms. And it's going to require us to cook with the trash, as they call it today. And the term trash cooking, it's not a new term. It's kind of this trendy term today that people use to promote themselves as being sustainable. It's become cool to cook with trash. But in the future, this will be the norm. The term trash cooking, it will just cease to exist. It's going to be a term of the past, because no part of the product will be considered trash. And I'm not just speaking of the offcuts of the meat, or the offcuts of the fish, or the offcuts of the vegetables. I'm speaking of everything. I'm speaking of the coffee grinds left from your coffee service at the end of the night. When you make your nut milks, you have all this pulp left. All this stuff has flavor in it, and it's discarded. In the future, because of taxations on waste, we're going to be forced to look at every aspect of our kitchens and our restaurant to extract every last piece of flavor out of everything that we use. And this is not only an ethical approach, but this is going to help us financially as well. Because I said before, you produce less waste, you pay less tax. And I think one of the biggest kind of contributors to waste is this transportation of goods. equals expensive products. In the future, and we already see it today, the transportation of goods and the cost of that is extreme today. But in the future, the emphasis on carbon emissions is going to be simply the fact that the higher the carbon emissions, the more taxed the shipping is going to cost. Buying locally and cooking seasonally will be the most cost-effective way to run a restaurant. I mean, nowadays, especially having a restaurant in Europe, it's super easy to go, oh, wow, well, tomato season's running out, but it's been so busy, and I really haven't had the time to come up with a new dish. Oh, so fuck it. Let's just order tomatoes from Spain. So in the future, there's going to be no safety net for lack of creativity. This safety net's just going to cost way too much money. You're already paying taxes on waste. You can't pay taxes on shipping stuff from overseas or even from another country into your country. It's also going to push chefs to work in a much more spontaneous way. I'm often asked, oh, can you come and cook? And can you do your signature dish? I think signature dishes are not going to exist in the future. Chefs are going to change on a daily, weekly, monthly basis based on the seasons, because they're not going to want to import something from another part of the world just because it's going out of season in their restaurant and, oh, I love this dish, I don't want to take it off the menu. No, that's not going to happen. We kind of adopted this way of thinking at a mass from the very beginning. Since the day we opened, we have never repeated a dish on the menu. We just kind of keep evolving and doing new dishes, and we've never brought a dish back based on a season. And this kind of working in this mindset of forced creativity, I think in the future we're going to see gastronomy kind of progress in a way we could have never imagined. I think that also cuisines around the world are they're very much influenced by other cuisines around the world. And that's because the products are available from around the world. I think that in the future, you're going to see cuisines become much more focused and really focused on the terroir. But this is, ironically, a very double-edged sword, because if you're a globe-trotting foodie or gourmand, in order to experience different cuisines, you're not going to be able to go to one city and experience different cuisines. You're going to have to travel to do that. And the ironic part of traveling is carbon emissions. So how do we solve that? I'm going to let you think about that, because I'm going to move on to the next part of the discussion. So I've kind of portrayed the governments right off the bat as being these kind of waste militants and taxing us on everything. But I'm also going to talk about how the governments are going to help us. They're going to offer subsidies for certain sustainable practices. I think they're going to realize the impact that restaurants have not only in producing waste, but eliminating waste as well. For example, if you buy a certain percentage of your products from a certain square kilometer radius, you're going to be given tax breaks. You're not going to pay as high taxes on products coming from closer to you. And the closer you buy the product, the bigger tax break you're going to get. This not only promotes lower carbon emissions, but I think it has the potential to create more of a local economy and livelihood for the community. Henry, who is in all the pictures with me, is one of my waiters, and by far has the least amount of tattoos and the most distinguished looking person in the restaurant, so that's why he's in all the pictures. All right. Land reincarnated. Governments are also going to offer subsidies on reclaimed land. There's going to be, I think in the future, we're going to see a lot of kind of post-industrial sites. And I wanted to talk about this because we opened a mass in a shipyard that had been closed for 20 years. And it kind of been abandoned, and there's some artists and architects living in lofts and kind of doing stuff like that. But largely forgot it. 80% of our guests that came to the restaurant that were from Copenhagen had never even been out to this part of Copenhagen. And you can see, I mean, the center of Copenhagen is just right over here. It's not far away, but to get to it, you have to go, it's a pretty long bike ride. If you have to ride your bike farther than 20 minutes in Copenhagen, it's a long ways away. So, I mean, when we took over this spot, what I'm talking about right now wasn't even a thought. I was so worried about opening the restaurant and the expectations of the restaurant and all of this. And it wasn't until maybe 6 months after we opened that I really realized, wow, we have a really, really unique opportunity to work in a sustainable way. We have space, which is a luxury when you have your own restaurant. If you're in the center of the city, you don't have space. You don't have the opportunity to have a garden, to compost, to recycle, to build gardens that eat up your waste. So I think in the future, because of waste taxation, chefs are going to want to move their restaurants out of the center of the city. They're going to want to take over reclaimed land because this will give them the opportunity to reduce the waste that their restaurants are producing and to kind of put it back into growing their own vegetables. I mean, we were really, really criticized, not criticized, but challenged, and mostly by my colleagues about why you're crazy. You're gonna fail. You're gonna move outside the city, and no one's gonna come out there. It's too far away. But this gave us the chance to develop a really intense sustainability program. And I mean, we built a 700 square meter garden. It started as 500 meters, but I'm the only one that mows the lawn, so it's now 700 meters. We added a greenhouse, which the greenhouse for me completely changed everything. And I'm happy to say in the last year, we have been able to completely close the loop in the garden and the greenhouse from the restaurant. Nothing we use in the greenhouse or the garden does not come from the restaurant. We don't add any fertilizers, anything to boost the growing of the plants. It's all done through composting and growing our own worms. But most importantly, if we existed in the future, I think our tax breaks would be quite generous. We have decreased our waste from the day we opened to now by 67%, just based on what we're able to do in the garden. And in the future, like I said before, we would be making more money in the restaurant and doing more stuff in the restaurant because of this. So I want to talk about something that I think will be so necessary, and it's just going to be a common place amongst restaurants in the future, and that's urban gardens and greenhouses. Now, the first thing that came to my mind, and I'm sure a lot of you are thinking this right now, at least the chefs, is, okay, it's a greenhouse. It's not going to taste as good as what grows outside. And, you know, I don't want to do that. Maybe I'll sprout plants and move them outside. I don't want to grow in a greenhouse. I don't believe in it. And I thought the exact same thing before we kind of embarked on this journey, if you will, of trying to grow delicious things in an urban setting. And so we've worked with a couple guys, or a few guys, Mikolas and Daniel, from a group called BioArc, and they are 3 guys that have a office 100 meters from us. They started out maybe a year and a half ago. They had no idea about urban gardening, sustainable gardening systems, but they were super interested and super passionate about it. And we've kind of used our garden as a test site for them. And the first thing they said to me is like, man, we can grow loads of stuff. We can grow more than you can use. And I said to them, stop right there. If it doesn't taste good, then I don't really care about any of your growing methods. So let's take a step back and talk about how do we make it grow a lot and make it taste good at the same time. So we kind of, I think the whole basis of it was that I don't want this to be a gimmicky garden where you walk around and it looks beautiful and it does, but it doesn't taste good. And maybe we don't even use it because it doesn't taste as good as stuff we can get outside of the city. So we've kind of, it took us a while to kind of come up with different solutions for the garden and how are we going to make things taste good. And I'm just going to basically focus on the greenhouse because growing outside is much easier to make things taste good than in the greenhouse. So I wanted to show you this. This is our greenhouse. And when I started this project, I never thought the greenhouse was going to look like this. This is probably the most technologically advanced greenhouse I've ever set foot in. And that's not the doing of me. That's the doing of these guys at BioArc. They are a bit psycho, but when you work with people like that, it infects you, and then you become a bit weird about stuff. So we focused on making things taste good. And I talked about everything being closed looped. And I just want to give you an example of a few things that we do to make the plants taste good. But the first question we asked ourselves is, what makes plants taste good? It's the same things that make the stuff that we eat makes us healthy. It's the stuff that we feed the animals around us to make them taste good. And that's nutrients. That's nutrients that are pure, clean, and unmodified. So just to kind of break down how this greenhouse works, we have zip grows. And when they showed me this, I was like, get that shit away from me. This is, I mean, there's no dirt. What are you talking about? They said, no. Let's try a few. Let's see how the product is. So last winter was kind of the first winter we had and really the first testing grounds for these zip grows. And it really it came down to having this cycle that comes through the zip grows. So the zip grow, you basically pull this mesh out and you lay your sprouts down with the little amount of dirt that you sprout inside. 20 is around the magic number we found. And we grow all of our own earthworms. So you lay 20 earthworms down in with the plants, and then you pull them up in the zips. Now, how do we get nutrients to the plants if we are not adding fertilizer into our water source? So the water tanks are here and here, and it's about a 500-liter capacity in each water tank. How do we get nutrients to the plants now? We're not going to add anything to the water. The water has to be clear. But what we can add to the water is fish. So in each water tank, we have approximately 30 to 40 carp. The carp produce waste, which goes through the water system, which drip down into these zip grows, which the earthworms eat the solids from the waste, turning it into worm castings, which then can be broken down by fungus and bacteria to a point where the plants can absorb. That worked great for the first few weeks, and things seemed like they were thriving. And then some of the plants started to kind of wilt and turn yellow, and we're not adding anything. We're not adding anything. So we kind of Mikael and Lassen went home and kind of, what can we do? We need more nutrients. So we decided to bring a piece of the garden inside our compost. There's a water tank right here. It's a super ghetto cut out water tank. We put a fish pump inside that. We add our compost and the worm castings from our worm production, aerate it for 24 hours with the fish pump, bringing all the microorganisms back to life, and then we spray it on the plants with a squeeze bottle, foliage feeding. It's not a new concept. It's been around, but for us, this was kind of the last little bit of nutrients that the plants needed. And I've gone completely off my notes here. That's what I was afraid I was going to do. So this is really has allowed us to close the loop. And for me, I'm often asked, why do you do this? Why do you take this extra effort? And everyone's looking for this like philosophical, the moon and the stars and all this. For me, it's the right thing to do. And it makes me feel good inside to do this. So that's the reason. Why do you need more reason than that? It makes you feel good. And if you work in a place where you don't feel good, then you might as well not work there. So this is all done in a very, very industrial setting. Warehouses all around us. And this is all also very really satisfying, because we've taken land that was thought to be unusable and built on it. And this is something that's going to have to happen in the future, because restaurants are going to have to be opened close to cities, but not in cities. We're gonna have to do this. We're gonna have to take over land that no one wants anymore, if we want to grow our own vegetables, if we want to work in a sustainable way, and if we don't want to pay tax or as much tax. But just to kind of wrap all this up, this is not child labor. I just want to clarify that in the beginning. Everything we do now is going to directly affect the future. And for me, it's time to start preparing for that now. I mean, I've learned in the last 2 years of running a restaurant, I've learned lots of things, but I think one of the most important things is that we need to be proactive and not reactive. When you're reactive, you're too late, and you're just playing catch up. We need to prepare the next generation of chefs. We need to give them the information to carry the torch. We need to let them know what we have learned today, so they can make the right decisions for the future of food. Thank you.